The sky over the Palisades, California, was a choking swirl of orange and gray as embers danced in the wind. The wildfire was fierce, indiscriminate, devouring homes, wildlife, and dreams in its path. For Jessica Clarke, it felt like the end of her world as she watched the flames inch closer to her family's modest home, her heart hammering in her chest. Amidst the chaos, she saw him for the first time. Towering, with soot smudged across his sharp features and eyes that burned with determination, Matt Holloway was a firefighter on a mission. He barked orders to his team, then turned to Jessica. "Ma'am, we've got to get your family out of here, now." Jessica nodded, grabbing her mother's hand and ushering her younger brother toward the fire truck parked a few yards away. Matt stayed close, his presence a calming force in the storm. When her brother tripped and fell, it was Matt who scooped him up effortlessly, his voice gentle as he reassured the boy. Once they were safe, Jessica couldn't take her eyes off him. There was something magnetic about Matt, a mix of courage and kindness that lingered in her thoughts long after the fire was contained and the rebuilding began. As the city worked to heal, Jessica found herself running into Matt more often. Whether at community meetings or volunteering efforts, their paths crossed repeatedly, each encounter deepening the connection between them. Matt was everything Jessica hadn't realized she needed, a rock-solid presence in a world turned upside down. Jessica was no stranger to heartbreak. Her fiancé, Darren, had left her a year before the fire. It was a clean break, but one that left her questioning her judgment. Though Darren had moved out of her life, his shadow still lingered, casting doubt on her ability to trust again. But Matt was different. His honesty, his steady gaze, and the way he genuinely cared for her family began to melt the walls Jessica had built around her heart. Within months, their bond blossomed into a love that felt as fierce and consuming as the wildfire that had brought them together. 2 years after they met, Matt proposed. The wedding was a small, intimate affair, held on the land they'd purchased for a fraction of its original value, an unexpected silver lining of the fire that had driven many to sell and leave. Their love story seemed to be one of redemption, a phoenix rising from the ashes of tragedy. Life was blissful in the early years. They built a cozy home on their new land, surrounded by lush greenery that had reclaimed the scorched earth. Their 2 children, Lily and Max, became the center of their world. Matt was a doting father, and Jessica often marveled at how lucky she was to have found him. They took family vacations, laughed over dinner, and celebrated every milestone with joy and gratitude. But happiness, as Jessica would learn, can be as fleeting as it is intoxicating. It began with small things. Matt started coming home later than usual, his explanations vague and hurried. He seemed distant, distracted, as though carrying a weight he couldn't share. Jessica chalked it up to the demands of his job, but a gnawing suspicion took root in her mind. One evening, she found a text on his phone, a message from an unknown number that read, "Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was amazing." The words sent a chill down her spine, but she convinced herself it had to be a misunderstanding. Matt wasn't the kind of man to betray her trust. Or so she thought. Her doubts grew, and Jessica began piecing together clues. Missed calls, unexplained absences, and a change in Matt's demeanor that she couldn't ignore. She feared he was seeing another woman, but the truth, when it revealed itself, was far more devastating. One afternoon, Jessica came home earlier than expected. She opened the door quietly, not wanting to wake the kids from their nap in the living room. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard hushed voices coming from the bedroom. Her heart raced as she pushed the door open, only to be met with a sight that shattered her world. Matt was in bed with another man. Jessica stood frozen, disbelief mingling with a tidal wave of rage and betrayal. Matt scrambled to his feet, his face pale as he stammered, "Jessica, wait, I can explain." But she didn't want to hear it. She fled the house, her mind a whirlwind of anger and pain. How could he do this to her? To their family? In the weeks that followed, Jessica maintained a facade of normalcy. She cooked, cleaned, and smiled for the sake of their children, but inside she seethed. Matt tried to apologize, promising it was a mistake and that he would end the affair, but his words fell on deaf ears. 6 weeks later, Jessica devised a plan. She invited Matt and his lover to dinner, framing it as a gesture of reconciliation. The dinner table was set with meticulous care, china plates polished to a shine, silverware gleaming under the soft glow of the chandelier, and a bottle of Matt's favorite red wine breathing on the counter. Jessica's hands were steady as she arranged the final touches, her movements purposeful, her face calm. Beneath the surface, however, her heart raced with a toxic mix of anger, pain, and resolve. Matt arrived home with a cautious smile, his lover, Darren, trailing hesitantly behind him. His name was Darren, a fellow firefighter whom Matt had been seeing for 5 years secretly. Jessica knew that now, though she hadn't cared to learn it until tonight. Darren was handsome in a polished, almost clinical way, a stark contrast to Matt's rugged charm. The sight of the two men together filled her with bile, but she forced a welcoming smile as she ushered them in. "This is unexpected," Matt said, his voice uncertain. "I thought it was time to clear the air," Jessica replied sweetly. "We're all adults here, right?" Darren shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering between Jessica and Matt. He seemed to sense that something was off, but Matt, ever the optimist, tried to ease the tension. "Thank you for this, Jess. It means a lot." She smiled, pouring wine into their glasses. "Of course. Let's enjoy the evening." The conversation was stilted, every word a forced attempt at civility. Jessica asked Darren about his work, his interests, his family, her questions sharp and deliberate, each one a subtle jab. Darren answered cautiously, his voice tinged with guilt. Matt sat silently, his shoulders tense, the weight of his betrayal hanging heavy in the air. As the meal progressed, Jessica watched them closely, her expression serene as they drank glass after glass of the poisoned wine. The toxin was slow-acting, designed to cause disorientation and pain before it took hold completely. Darren was the first to notice something was wrong. He clutched his stomach, his face contorting in discomfort. I don't feel well," he muttered, his voice weak. Matt reached out to steady him, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" Jessica tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Is everything okay?" Darren's response was cut short by a violent gagging noise. He doubled over, his body convulsing as the poison began to take effect. Matt turned to Jessica, panic in his eyes. "What did you do?" She stood, her smile fading into a cold, unforgiving glare. "What I had to." The men's suffering was prolonged and horrific. They gasped for air, clawing at their throats as the poison ravaged their systems. Jessica watched impassively, her heart hardened by their betrayal. When the toxin proved insufficient to end their lives, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Lighting a match, she set the curtains ablaze, the flames spreading rapidly. The men's cries turned to screams as the fire engulfed the room. Darren's voice was shrill, desperate, while Matt's was hoarse with pain and disbelief. Jessica walked out as the flames consumed the house, their screams echoing behind her. When the fire was extinguished, the scene left behind was one of utter devastation. The bodies were barely recognizable, charred husks curled in grotesque positions, their final moments of agony etched into the very marrow of their remains. Teeth gleamed unnaturally white amidst the blackened bone, a haunting testament to the inferno that had claimed them. Jessica vanished into the night, her vengeance complete, but her soul forever scarred by the flames of her own making. The fire that consumed Jessica's home was ruled an accident at first. The devastation was so complete that investigators initially assumed an electrical fault had sparked the blaze. However, as the charred remains of Matt and Darren were examined, inconsistencies began to emerge. Forensic specialists noted that the men's bodies displayed signs of internal trauma inconsistent with fire-related injuries. Traces of poison were discovered in their stomachs, and the cause of death was ultimately ruled to be a combination of poisoning and smoke inhalation. The authorities began to dig deeper, and Jessica quickly found herself under scrutiny. Neighbors reported that Jessica had seemed calm, too calm, after the fire. Some recalled seeing her leave the property shortly before the flames engulfed the house, carrying a small bag. Her decision to remain distant during the investigation also raised eyebrows. Though she claimed to be grieving, her lack of visible emotion set off alarm bells. It wasn't long before the police pieced together a motive. Friends and acquaintances came forward, recounting the tension in Jessica's marriage and rumors of Matt's infidelity. Jessica's friends, who had noticed her growing unease in the months leading up to the fire, spoke of her cryptic comments about betrayal and justice. Though there was no concrete evidence tying her directly to the poison or the fire, the circumstantial evidence painted a damning picture. Jessica was summoned for questioning, but by the time the authorities arrived at her temporary residence, she was gone. Jessica's 2 children, Lily and Max, were left behind in the chaos. After the fire, they were placed in the care of Jessica's sister, Rachel, who lived several states away. Rachel was horrified by the revelations about her sister's possible involvement in Matt's death, but vowed to protect the children from the media frenzy and the stigma surrounding their mother's actions. Jessica left no note, no explanation for her departure. Her children's toys and clothes were left untouched, a chilling reminder of the life she had abandoned. Lily, who was 5 years old, often asked where her mother had gone, while 3-year-old Max struggled to comprehend the loss of both parents. Rachel did her best to provide them with stability, but the shadow of their mother's actions loomed large. Jessica's escape was haphazard. In the weeks following the fire, she withdrew cash from multiple accounts, sold a few family heirlooms to avoid leaving a digital trail, and changed her appearance. She cut her hair short, dyed it dark, and began using a new identity forged by someone she'd paid in cash. She moved across state lines, first staying in cheap motels and later renting under-the-table accommodations in remote areas. Jessica avoided large cities, knowing they would make her easier to track. She worked odd jobs, cleaning houses, waitressing, even seasonal farm work, always moving before anyone could get too close. Her paranoia became her constant companion. She avoided cameras, left no digital footprint, and paid for everything in cash. She avoided airports and bus terminals, traveling only by car and taking winding back roads to remain unnoticed. Jessica learned to blend in, becoming just another face in the crowd. The authorities continued their search, but leads grew cold as months turned into years. Jessica's face appeared on missing persons posters and true crime specials, but sightings were always fleeting and unverified. Though Jessica remained free, her life was far from glamorous. Loneliness consumed her as she avoided forming relationships, knowing that any connection could jeopardize her safety. She kept tabs on her children from afar, occasionally learning updates through anonymous phone calls to Rachel. Despite her efforts to stay hidden, Jessica lived in constant fear of being caught. Every knock at the door, every police car she passed on the road sent her heart racing. Yet, she refused to turn herself in, convinced that the justice system would never understand the pain and betrayal that had driven her to her actions. Jessica's face remains in databases, her name whispered in conversations about unsolved cases. But she continues to slip through the cracks, a ghost moving through the fringes of society. To this day, she looks over her shoulder, knowing that the flames of her vengeance may one day catch up to her. Until then, she survives, haunted, hunted, and utterly alone.